So we'll start, and as usual, I'll commence with some housekeeping. So can I remind everyone present that the meeting is being live streamed as well as recorded via the internet, and this recording will be archived for future viewing. Could all participants please mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? And if you wish to speak, can you please raise your hand in person if you're sat in the chamber, or use the remote raise hand function if you're joining us online. If a participant raises their hand via the remote function and is not subsequently invited to speak, please could they turn their camera on to indicate or place a message in the chat function. And when invited by myself to speak, please could all participants ensure that their microphone and camera is on to ensure that they can be seen and heard when actively participating. If this isn't possible for any reason, please bring it to the attention of myself or Democratic Services Officer as soon as possible. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally and not via the chat function for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and to grab the attention of myself or a Democratic Services Officer. If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they're addressing the committee, then they should let myself or Democratic Services Officer know. So let me welcome all committee and non-committee elected members, cabinet members, our officers, and also to anyone watching the live meeting broadcast. Moving straight onto the agenda and beginning with agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any, please?
Everyone's present, Chair, apart from Councillor Perry, who is joining remotely, and he may have some issues because he's travelling. So we'll keep an eye out for him, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Now on to the minutes of the previous meeting, and these are the minutes from our meeting on the 16th of January. Are members happy with those minutes? And if so, can I have a proposer? Thank you, Councillor Hooper, and a seconder, please. Councillor Iannucci.
Seconded.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Councillor. And on to declarations of interest. Are there any this evening? Councillor Champion.
I am a member of the Planning Committee. I've got to leave early, so I don't know whether I'll be around when that's being talked about.
Thank you, Councillor Champion. Can you just let me know? So that's in relation to agenda item 5, I assume. And in terms of your membership of the Planning Committee, are you declaring a personal or a prejudicial interest?
Personal, but not prejudicial. I just wanted the committee to know, and I'm sure there's other members perhaps of this committee that are also members of the Planning Committee.
Thank you very much. Councillor Drake.
Yes, I'm also a member of the Planning Committee as well, and so it would be a personal declaration.
Thank you very much, Councillor Drake. Anything from anyone else? No. Okay. So we move on to agenda item 4. This is an update report on recycling and waste management service charges 23-24. The report is a reference from Cabinet, and it sets out the progress that has been made in relation to subscriptions for garden waste collections and the position regarding residual waste, as well as proposals regarding arrangements going forward. It's before us tonight for members to consider and comment on, with any recommendations going to Cabinet. Welcome Colin Smith, who'll be providing a 2-part PowerPoint presentation with opportunities to ask questions on both aspects of the report. So thank you, Colin, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Okay, Gareth, can you put the slide? Thanks very much. Okay, to slide 1. So as an introduction, as the Chair mentioned, we've split this into kind of 4 items to present the report. Items 1, a performance update for the new green waste subscription service. Item 2, an update since the implementation of 3 weekly black bag collections. And then we'll pause for questions for the items 1 and 2, and then carry on the second part of the PowerPoint for items 3 and 4, which is the infrastructure and then a legislative update. And then at the end, take further questions. Okay, so starting with the green waste subscription service. So this was introduced in July 2023 and was rolled out as a 2-tier service, £20 for up to 8 bags and £30 for an unlimited service. And this cost was based on a pro rata basis. So the actual cost of the service was £36 and £54 respectively. So members may remember the report that was presented 12 months ago. It was actually based on those costs, but there was also, it was based on up to 4 bags, up to 8 bags, and a pay-as-you-go service for excess bags at 50p each. But once we did the modelling, it just proved too many variables to do it, and it was very difficult to manage. So we requested emergency powers to change that and just relate to £36 and £54 for the 8 bags and unlimited service. So it changed after the last report, and it proved really quite successful. It was easy for our crews to be able to manage the individual premises, tailored services. So all we had is a key on the collection sheets, basically as a standard or enhanced service. Whereas to do as a pay-as-you-go service, it would have proved very, very difficult. So the payments were selected last year were below the Welsh average. It was £38.99, and that is transitioning towards more £50 at the moment. Most councils are starting to increase their charges. But what is quite unique to our service that was introduced last year, there's no other service in Wales that offers an unlimited collection. So the trend across Wales is to use a 240 litre bin, which represents about 4 of our garden waste bags. So just on the standard service, up to 8 bags represents double what is offered nationally, and the unlimited service is quite unique. So that proved 2 things really. It was very popular with residents because those that have very large gardens were able to pay a little bit more and have that unlimited collection, but also it kind of gave us the tonnage required towards our statutory recycling targets. We set out initially to target around 10,000 properties, and towards the end of the season we had 12,635 subscribers. So we captured a rate far lower than what we originally anticipated, so it went really well. So breaking that down, we had 11,577 subscribers at £20 and 1,058 subscribers at £30, generating an income of £262,880. Okay, so if we look at the pro rata rate of the income, what that actually represents is a full year of £473,904, and it was pro rata because of the late start. So vehicle savings were estimated at £75,000, so it was actually represented 50% of the target, and that's because we had more subscribers, we actually needed some support on certain busy days. So if you look at the full year, add in the vehicle savings as well as what the pro-rated rate would have represented in the full year, we believe we exceeded that £500,000 target by about £50,000. So indeed very successful, and obviously looking ahead for the full year, we hopefully will exceed that target again and deliver that additional savings. So green waste, we presented risks last year, and it was a real concern that we wouldn't have enough to deliver what were contracted tonnage under our organics IIA, the inter-authority agreement with Cardiff, and our contractors, Welsh Water at the anaerobic digestion plant and Open Window Compost Facility. It's a joint organics contract. But thankfully, the green waste tonnage last year was above the previous year, so it didn't really have sorry, I'm in trouble with the mic. It didn't really affect our tonnage, and thankfully we largely avoided. Okay. So there is a need to be cautious with green waste because it does vary annually. It really depends on the weather, and it's just so unpredictable. So it's always a risk, particularly this year, with forthcoming statutory recycling targets increasing to 70% this year. It's the largest statutory target we will have to achieve so far to date. So we will be reliant on green waste this year again, and hopefully the weather will be kind to us and we'll get a large participation in a year that's going to be quite challenging. So the charges for this year are going to remain the same, so it's largely very positive, although residents will probably be not unique to paying that full charge, because the prorated at £20 and £30 last year will probably not be such a shock, but it was important that we communicated that it was based on the £36 and the £54 respectively. Okay, so leading us nicely on to the 3 weekly black bag collections update. So again, this transitioned in the same month as the green waste subscription services, and it transitioned over about 3 weeks, largely because we had to transition the collection rounds over the period, over the 3 rounds, 3 zones of the Vale of Glamorgan, which was quite challenging. Overall, we've got a positive impact on residual waste challenges. They are coming down, which is positive. And it looks as though this will probably be our lowest residual waste tonnage that represents over the last 10 plus years. So we're largely moving in the right direction, and that increases our performance for recycling. Another positive in that transition period, we added on batteries and wee collections, and we collected 30 tonnes, 9 tonne of batteries and over 21 tonnes of electrical waste. Again, that was really positive and added value to our performance, recycling performance. And largely because we diverted that waste probably that was already in the black bags at the time. So we don't have a statutory duty to collect it at the curbside at the moment, but it's likely that that will change in years to come, and the duty will be on the producers of that waste. So we continue to have unreserved support for large families of pets and hygiene waste. That's ongoing. So we still have the purple bag scheme, although we are reviewing that because unfortunately that's been abused over the last year or two. But we will always provide support, unreserved support, for anyone that needs to put out residual waste, as long as they've recycled all that, the other fractions. There's been a noted increase of the waste at the HWRC since the changes, but to be honest, we thought that was likely to happen anyway. And we have further initiatives planned over the next 12 months to make sure we reach that statutory recycling target. So we'll look at HWRC controls, that will be controlling the blag splitting we used to have at the site in Sully, and advice at the Landau site. And we will look at 3 weekly collections for flats and apartments, and also the addition of vape recycling and other legislative changes that will help us reduce our waste. We'll also look at pre-sorting bulky waste. So at the moment that goes straight into our Viridor plant. So what we'll look to do is bring that into our new plant in Sully on Atlantic Trading Estate, and do some pre-sorting and take out the recycling where possible. And of course the reuse shop has recently opened, and we hope that we can divert waste for and pick out those resellable items. We have our recycling officers very active in our communities at the moment, and they are assessing the black bags on collection days, and we will be trying to ask residents who don't recycle at the moment to take that recycling out of the black bag and present it for collections. If we have a lot of resistance, we do have legislation to back us up to actually serve notice, but we will try the educational approach firstly, obviously. And the main thing is our target now. We slipped down about 3% the year before last, but thankfully we're on target for the 70% at the moment this financial year, and hopefully we can build upon this and introduce those measures to ensure we reach those statutory targets and avoid largely the fines that are possibly will come upon us. Okay, so the next slide shows the compositional analysis undertaken on our black bags. So the headline that 40%, 42% of that black bag still has contents that could be largely recycled, and the most offensive one is food waste at 16%. And I guess we can kind of understand that there is some resistance. People still think it's a dirty substance and they don't like to participate in the food waste recycling scheme. But that is the one that makes the difference to us in our local environments. You can often tell the properties that don't food waste recycle. And then obviously the vermin and other things target those black bags. And then we have a local environmental quality standards where it impacts on our street cleaning teams, etc. So that is largely one we need to target. Additionally, it's one of the most costly to process and treat. So going into the black bag, it goes into the Viridor site, obviously, and it's burned, and that is our most expensive way of treatment. Okay, so I've kind of skipped through quite quickly those two items. So we'll pause there and perhaps take some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Colin. And I just want to start by saying, congratulations and thank you to yourself and your team, because those are very, very positive stats and facts that you presented before us this evening, particularly because there was, clearly a lot of concern when the decision was made to move towards 3-week collections and to introduce charges for green waste. So really good to hear that service has been oversubscribed. Can I just ask you one question before I bring in committee members? So I've seen some comments on social media, even today actually, suggesting that our black bag waste goes to China and contributes to pollution there, and I know that isn't the case, and you've made mention of it in your presentation, but I think it would be helpful if you could just explain what actually happens to our residual waste that's disposed of through the black bags. Thank you.
Well, Chair, I can certainly confirm that none of our waste goes to China. And it doesn't leave this country at all. In fact, all our residual waste collected at the curbside, all our street cleansing waste and all our bulky waste, everything collected at the HWRCs, all go to the site in Viridor, where it's used as a fuel and a source to produce renewable energy. The plant at Viridor has an output that produces enough renewable energy to power around 60,000 homes. And we neither landfill any of our waste either.
Thank you, Colin. That's really reassuring to hear. So can I bring in Councillor Pamela Drake first, please?
Oh, thank you for that, Colin. It was very interesting. Just one query. Under the further initiatives you're planning for this year, is regarding recycling of vapes. Have we had any instances of fires in our waste systems? As this was mentioned to us when we visited Viridor, because last year, because this was a particular issue at the time. I was just wondering whether we've had any.
No, thankfully nothing to date, but we've had instances where we've had lithium-ion batteries explode at our new recycling plant, but we managed to contain it. But nothing on vapes. We are looking to, as I say, introduce that as new recycling initiative in the next month or so. And what we've been advised recently is they've done a study on this, and there is a risk that adding them to the battery bag will create or result in fires. So we are looking to introduce a separate bag. It'll be the same bag. We just ask residents to present it separately. But once we get back to the recycling centre, we will also segregate it into different skips to avoid that risk.
Oh, thank you for that. I know they're supposed to return them to the shops they buy them from, but I don't think many of them do that, unfortunately.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Colin. Councillor Champion, I think you had your hand up next.
Oh, thank you very much. I thought I was down the line, but thanks very much. Yeah, I did ask Colin separately how many flats, and there are about 5,000. So I am slightly concerned about the 3-week for flats, because obviously they have a lot less space than I have in my garage, for instance. And also, you've already mentioned sort of the purple bag, and you were going to have a box as well that could be used. And can you give some insight as to how that is manifesting? Because that was a great concern with going to 3 weeks. Yeah, that's really what I have.
Colin, if you're able to respond to that, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Champion. Yes, and to go back, there are about 5,000 flats. That doesn't mean there's 5,000 types of bin stores, because obviously a lot of apartments and waterfront areas only have 2 or 3 bin stores for several hundred flats. But I think it's right to be cautious. It will take a little bit of transition to do this, and we've been working with landlords for several months now, increasing their recycling services, which were perhaps not as efficient as our curbside collection that most residents receive. And we will work with those landlords to provide the literature necessary to the residents. But ultimately, we need to get a grip of it, because the amount of fly tipping that occurs in these bin stores is largely getting out of control. And unfortunately, some landlords are reluctant to take responsibility. But we will work with them, and we will make sure it works. And if that transitions for a number of months, then we'll make sure we get it right, rather than just cut it loose on day one and then only provide that 3 weekly service. But we'll work with them to transition that in over a period of time. In terms of the purple bags and the boxes, to be honest, I'm quite surprised. I thought it would be a little bit more challenging myself, but that transition seems to have been very positive. And other than perhaps some residents who produce large AHP, which are absorbent hygiene products, which we've managed on a face-to-face, on a one-to-one basis to look at solutions for individual residents. The purple bag scheme continues to work quite well, and people who produce nappies have been purchasing the hard closed lid boxes, and that's working really well, and we pick those up at the same time as the residual waste. They are quite effective. They contain the smells, and those boxes are difficult to penetrate at all, and we've really not had any complaints at all, if I'm honest. So the 3 weekly has transitioned quite well.
That's great news. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. That was going to be one of my questions, actually, just understanding what steps we're taking to work with landlords to ensure that they understand what's happening and take responsibility. So it's good to know that's already in hand. Councillor Driscoll, please. Thank you for your patience.
I'm a very patient person. Thank you, Chair. Colin, just well done on hitting your targets on the waste service. I was quite sceptical at first that there wouldn't be a very good take-up, but fair play, it's done well. And you seem to be hitting the targets and getting the tonnage in. One question is since the 3 black bag scenario or collection, has your fly tipping gone up? Because that was the main concern, there'd be an increase in fly tipping. And also, go back to Viridor, it might be worthwhile opening up a visit to the full council, because it's a very interesting place to visit. While we were there, you did mention we might be going to the anaerobic plant as well. I wonder if that visit is still on. Thank you.
Colin, are you happy to respond to those issues? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Driscoll. I don't have to hand the stats for fly tipping. It doesn't appear that the introduction of 3 weekly black bag collections has increased fly tipping, but what it has had an impact on is litter bins. So what we largely find is the fly tipping are usually kind of building construction waste, largely the most. We've always had some sort of fly tipping in black bags on corners, and I think that's always been there. But what we have had is a lot of abuse of litter bins, and people who get to the end of the week, particularly food waste, and then there's an off to carrier bag stuffed in litter bins, and that kind of is ongoing, that problem. We've had stickers made that we're going to start putting them on bins, advising tenants or residents that it's an offence to deposit that waste in the bins, and as part of other savings, we will be looked to remove litter bins in some residential areas as well. So that will hopefully help with that. Yes, we all went to Viridor, this committee, and it was really hopefully an eye-opener. And I have contacted our anaerobic digestion plant, and they are happy to schedule a visit just for the committee. And I think that will be, again, another good eye-opener. So those who are not familiar with that, all our food waste goes to anaerobic digestion. And there it's the food waste is pulped, goes into a tank. I'll make this very brief. And in the absence of oxygen in the sealed tank, it produces methane gas. And that methane gas is used to power a generator that provides electricity back into the grid on the site. And it powers enough, it produces enough renewable energy for around 5,000 homes. So a very sustainable way of dealing with and treating food waste. And it is Welsh Government's preferred method of dealing with it. So there is the liquid format that remains in tanks, and that goes back as a fertiliser, soil improver, back into farms. And yeah, so it's we will set that visit up in the near future for the committee.
Thank you, Colin.
Thanks, Colin.
Thank you, and I look forward to it. I'm sure all committee members will. Councillor Hooper, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Colin, for your presentation, and thank you for stealing my question as well, because I think this litter bin issue is a really important one. Last week we took a paper at this committee about savings that the council were making, and I just want to talk to, and perhaps if there are cabinet members on the call as well, maybe they want to come in on this, because we seem to be utilising the opportunity that's given to us by the misuse of waste being deposited in litter bins to save money and take away litter bins from those people who want to use them ordinarily. And Emma came to the meeting last week and she was talking about half the litter bins perhaps going. And my point, and I'd welcome your views on, is whether or not this is the appropriate response, or should we be doing more that stops people depositing litter before we just take away those litter bins? Thank you.
Colin?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hooper. I think really and realistically it's a combination of both. It's education, it's awareness. We use our Commons Matters. We put these stickers over the bins to advise people it's an offence to do so, and then we analyse it. What we have done, we haven't actually disclosed this yet because it hasn't quite happened, but like I presented earlier, the compositional analysis of the residual waste, we've commissioned through our partners RAP, which is consultants engaged by Welsh Government and paid for by Welsh Government, by the way, to do compositional analysis of all our litter bin waste. So we're going through that so we can identify exactly what is in that waste. At the moment, it's largely indicating it's domestic waste. But once we have those results, we'll be able to drill down and look at the problem in more detail and perhaps come up with a priority tasks, how we're going to manage it more effectively. But there are some litter bins that will be essential, routes to school, shopping areas, where there's perhaps walks and high footfall areas, and we will need to keep some provision in those areas.
Councillor Hooper, did you want to come back in on that?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Colin. I think the challenge is whether or not we're actually making that we've made the decision already. So we're withdrawing those litter bins. That's a decision that's been made without actually solving the problem. The issue could be that we're taking that away from people who want to use it, but more importantly, we're actually missing the opportunity to solve the core problem, which is people depositing waste in places that they shouldn't. Can I just ask as supplementary whether or not there have been anybody who's actually we've had him taken enforcement action against for litter bin abuse in the Vale?
I think you've addressed that issue already in terms of the approach that's being taken, but is there anything that you'd like to add to the comments you've already made in relation to that?
Yeah, I believe we have taken enforcement action. I don't have the figures to hand. I'm happy to send them directly to you. But when we have common problems, we do actually send our teams out to capture that evidence. And I think there's been many a time that we have passed that on to our enforcement team, and they've taken appropriate action. I'll try to get a summary of that for you tomorrow. But largely, it is very difficult to capture from litter bin waste people who have unfortunately dumped them in those facilities and receptacles. They don't leave their names and addresses on there, and it's very difficult to be able to do it. And I guess we don't have the resources to cover that large areas. We rely on evidence being left in the bin. So it'll always remain a challenge, to be honest. I think education is the way forward. I remember the days of keep Britain tidy, take your waste home with you, and that's sort of the principle we'll be taking in some of this in the way forward. If you're out and you're walking your dog and you have waste or something, or you have a bit of litter, some of that advice will be take your litter home with you.
So, Colin, you mentioned where bins will still be retained in public areas. You mentioned things like routes to school. I think you also referenced public parks. So how are residents going to be notified if bins are going to be removed, and will there be any notification, or will they simply be taken away?
We are meeting as a team over the next few weeks in readiness for April, and we haven't completed that work yet, but we have mapped out where all the litter bins are across the Vale, and we know where they are, and we need to sit down and identify the ones we think should be suitable to be removed. We have statutory duties around certain areas like routes to school, shopping centres, and some of those will have to be retained anyway. But as you say, we need to identify the ones in residential areas, and perhaps those are probably the most suitable to remove. But that's perhaps something we can bring back to the committee at a later date.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. I'm sure committee would welcome understanding the basis on which those decisions have been made. Thank you. Councillor Ernest, I think you wanted to come in on this issue. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure if I've got to keep my hand up as well, Chairman. I think I have. Colin, 5 quick points. But firstly, can I congratulate you and your team, as indeed other members have, on the work you've done so far. It's really good and it's working well. My 5 quick points are, could you firstly send a copy of the very useful slides you presented to us a few minutes ago to members of the committee? It's very useful to have to hand if people ask us about waste disposal, and I'm sure most members of this committee and others do get those sort of queries. The second point, I noted that the UK government, or the English government if you prefer, is actually aiming to cut down on the number of recycling bags that households have. And we've heard very recently about Bristol, who appear to have about 9 bags. We've got quite a few, more than one handful, and whether we will in due course be looking to follow the advice, the sensible advice, if you like, of the UK government whilst still meeting our targets. Cardboard, I've had a number of complaints from people who, like me, receive goods from one of the mail order companies. They diligently fold their cardboard as best they can, because a lot of it is very strong stuff. And particularly if you're a lady or an elderly gentleman, you may find it quite difficult stamping on bits of cardboard to get it down to a size that will fit into your bags. We've had instances where the roundspeople have come across folded cardboard to the best of the household's ability, but that cardboard has been left behind. Once it's left behind, of course, it gets wet and it becomes unusable, and there's a further difficulty with disposing of that. My next point, penultimate, waste paper in clear bags. Now, many of us get a lot of waste paper, letter, envelopes, A4 paper, all sorts of stuff that is perfectly clean. But if you fill up the white bag, I use mine for newspapers and quite a lot in there. But if we were able to and do fill clear bags with waste paper, again, that is being left behind. That seems to me be a wasted resource, because it's quite evident in a clear bag that it's paper. It's quite clear there's nothing else in there, and yet that paper cannot be so easily collected. And the last point, and really this is slightly offbeat, the recycling at work regulations. I'm just wondering how well that is going to go. You are circulating businesses, and I've been speaking to local businesses about this, but I think it's going to take a considerable amount of time for a lot of them to get into that, because many of these business premises do not necessarily have storage areas. They might be offices that work on the first, second floor of a building, and they don't have the, the resource to put it out. Thank you, Colin, for all those long queries.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. With your last query, we'll hang on to that if that's okay, because Colin is going to cover the legislative framework and proposals going forward in the next presentation.
Okay,
yeah, and just a comment that as a woman, I have no difficulty folding up cardboard and putting it into recycling bags, but I take the point that some individuals, regardless of their gender, might have an issue with that. So, Colin, if you'd like to respond
I
to
think
those.
it's age, Chairman, as distinct from gender.
Well, I have some age as well, Councillor, but I take the point that, and I'm sure Colin will as well, take the point that for some people that might be a challenge. So if you could respond to those issues, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Ernest. Just going through the order then, first, the slides is fine. I've actually passed the slides to Gareth, and I'm sure he will circulate those to all committee members. The UK government, particularly England, are working on their own blueprint. So like Wales previously brought out the collections blueprint, the model that we're collecting, they're actually doing that same work. They've never had a collections blueprint, so they're trying to have a model for all of England. I don't think they've quite decided on that yet. Largely because their targets are not the same as in Wales. They're perhaps a little bit poor at recycling compared to Wales. Wales has invested an awful lot of money in it, but I know they are looking at doing their own collections blueprint, and that model is ongoing at the moment. I really have take your point about the cardboard. It does come up quite often, and largely because most residents, you were used to being able to put out large sheets of cardboard on the old system, and that's purely because we were collecting it on refuse vehicles with large compaction systems, and they could take those sorts of large items. But in the new system, which is far more sustainable, so if I say those organic materials like paper and card used to go to China and places in the Far East and across Europe because the product was so poor. So our new system, I know it's not so user friendly, but it's designed that way, one, to keep that cardboard dry as possible. Any moisture in the cardboard is devalued the product, so hence why we want it in the bag with the lid over wherever possible. But also it's designed that way because the aperture on the vehicle only accepts a certain size and certain width bag. And once you get in the vehicle, it is a kind of a knock-on effect. If you actually get into the vehicle, then there's a press in the back that pushes down on the cardboard through the collection process. And large irregular shapes of cardboard would affect the loading and the press of the vehicle. But it doesn't stop there. When you get to the other end and get to the plant and you discharge the cardboard, it's then got to go up a conveyor. And large sheets of glass would cause all sorts of blockages. So it's through a whole collection process that we need it within that bag. But what residents could do is perhaps have a number of bags, like the problem with your paper. If you exceed in the white bag, we're happy to provide a number of bags. So if you want 2 or 3 white bags, that's absolutely fine. But what plastic will do is contaminate the paper. So we get a high value for all our recycling materials, and the reason we get that high value is because we're collecting it all separately and maintaining it separate. So that paper is collected separately, loose, and goes into bulk containers and shipped off to paper mills. So any plastic in that stream would contaminate loads, and we'd also have the point where we'd have to have our staff climbing in quite large quantities of paper, split in bags by hand to be able to separate the paper from the stream. So it's kind of, I know it may not be user friendly at times, but it's that way for a reason and a process to ensure we capture very high value for our materials. And this year, I think I've probably got this in a slide, but I'll say it now. We are forecasting income of £1.4 million from the new plant and the small waste transfer station down in Cowbridge. So if we were looking at old commingle system, okay, yeah, it's very user friendly, it's easy to throw it all in one bag, but we would be looking at a comparable £1.4 million gate fee just to take that material off our hands, as opposed to £1.4 million of income. And that we sure that material stays in this country and wherever possible, and doesn't go abroad unsustainably.
Thank you very much. Colin.
Sorry, Councillor, I'll just say I'll pick up the recycling workplace regulations later on in the presentation.
Yes, indeed. Yes. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Colin. And in relation to your point, Councillor, about residents who might struggle with a number of recycling bags, important just to remind members of the public that there are quad bags available. So for those residents, particularly perhaps people who live on their own, rather than having 3 or 4 bags, they can have one bag which is separated into sections and put their recycling in each of those bags. That's a really useful way of ensuring that you're able to resolve some of the space issues.
Well, I have got one myself, so there you are.
Great.
Thank you, Chairman.
Good. So we move on now to Councillor Penn, please. I think you wanted to come in. Thank you.
Brilliant. Can you hear me okay, Chair?
Yes, we can.
Smashing. Thanks, Colin. Brilliant and great that it's proven a success through the efforts of Vale residents, their hard work, and your team and all the guys on the vans. Brilliant. Couple of things that just wanted to ask. The one had been covered about flats. That's brilliant. First 3 months of collection, August, September, October, exceeded the collected amount in the same 3 months of 22, so this year, although 2021 was higher. Do you think that's probably because people were at home more because of the lockdowns, so they spent more times in their gardens, so it was sort of artificially high, so we are actually still doing well, even though it's a bit lower than 21. As the black bag quantity reduces, possibly as the recycled elements in those bags gets recycled, could this reduce the black bag amounts going to Riverdor? Because I know we have a tonnage contract. What was the other thing? Yeah, I see that the FCC Environment have 10 reuse shops that they manage and they recirculate. I was amazed at this, 2,500 tons of products. Is there any info on the Barry reuse shop yet? How much they are redistributing? And what was the other thing? And the other thing was that just wanted to make the point on the green waste bags. It's really good value for money. I did a little bit of digging into other councils and what they charge, and Reading charge far more than we do for only 2 bins, and the Gloucester, you can only put 1 bin out. Bath, only 1 bin, which is more than we charge. And actually, when you go around our sort of neighbouring councils in England and the south, we are really good value for money, and I'm really glad that it's a success. Again, congratulations, mate! All the hard work of you boys and the residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Colin, do you want to respond to any of those comments? And then I think we're bringing in Councillor Iannucci, and unless anybody else wants to speak on this issue, we'll move on to the second part of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Penn. Yes, the first 3 months were good, really good, and were better than the year before. And quite likely, as you highlighted, not so good as the year before that. As I mentioned earlier, green waste is so seasonal, and it really does change depending on the weather. And I think the year before was a better year, and that's probably why a lot of people were home doing more gardening and taking advantage of that. But it really is weather dependent, the green waste. If you get really long spells of hot spells of weather, the grass doesn't grow and the performance dips terribly. And we just never know year on year, really. I think what the subscription service has shown is that it hasn't really had an impact on business, and business is business as normal. And you're right to highlight the success. Really, it really is a good news story. We exceeded that performance target. We brought in the income. We managed to make savings. And if you look at it, what we provide in the Vale of Glamorgan compared to any other council I'm aware of, there's nobody provides an unlimited service. And we provide more volume and tonnage than any other council and below the Welsh average. And I know a lot of them are transitioning to around £50 per collection. So we represent good value for money. And it's good for us because with that limited process, we kind of capture more tonnage as well. So it's good for our all-round performance. The black bags, we have in the contract with Viridor, it's a 25-year contract. And in that contract are factored in the statutory recycling targets all the way through, and the waste minimisation is part of that contract. So it will drop year by year, and that's already factored into the contract. But largely, the agenda will be from Welsh Government that the target is zero waste one day. So there will be continued work to reduce the contents of the black bag and reduce waste, and I'll pick up some of that in the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Colin. Councillor Iannucci, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll lesson to be faster and put my hand up quicker next time because everyone's nicked my questions. I just wanted to ask, on one of the points it said about hoping that moving to 3 weekly collections for flats will help us get to the 70% target for recycling. I was just wondering, are we expecting or hoping to do better even if we don't bring them on board with the same scheme? And sort of how much are we expecting adding them under the 3 weekly scheme to improve our rates? And then I've got a second question about the reuse shop at the recycling centre, but I'll ask it after the second bit.
Thank you, Colin.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Yeah, I mean, everything will help our performance. How much we will actually generate from it, we don't know yet. It's difficult now because everything's so separated, because it all goes into the masses. And whereas we used to collect all of recycling commingled, and we used to go over a weighbridge, and we used to immediately have the amount of tonnage we collected every day. Whereas now it goes into our plant and we process it, and it may take weeks and weeks and weeks to be able to fill haulage vehicles. And at that point, you only then, when it leaves the plant, do you know how much you've actually collected. So it's much more difficult to judge. But what we have noticed, as we've been contacting landlords and doing assessments of flats and apartments, some of them aren't producing any recycling at all. So I think it will only bring, it will only reduce waste and add more performance. But how we measure that will be quite difficult, to be honest.
Okay, thank you.
And Councillor, I think you said you had a second question about the reuse shop, if you'd like to ask that now. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you. I was just wondering how long, so it says there's 3 full-time staff being funded at the shop, how long they're in place for, just so that we get a feel for sort of the commitment that is being made to having that reuse shop on site.
In all honesty, it's probably too early to tell at the moment, because they only had a soft approach to opening in December, and the official opening is next month. So I think it's probably too early to kind of capture how well it's going at the moment. But Enfys are quite used to running reuse shops. I know the member mentioned earlier how many they do across Wales. So I think this is, and it's our only main one reuse shop in the Vale of Glamorgan. I think it will be quite successful. And I think probably that's another report or another update, maybe in 6 months, and we can reflect on the reuse and capture how much material we've diverted and how much income it's generated. There is a profit share built into it, a 25% profit share for the Vale of Glamorgan at intervals. So it is quite a good news story all around it. Again, that will help our performance, but mainly as we've only just opened, I think it'd be difficult to tell how well it's performing yet.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Colin. And just before we move on to the next part of the report, I was looking at a report in national media today that was talking about how well is your local authority doing in terms of recycling rates. And Wales as a whole, recycling rate is about, I think, 50%. The rest of the UK is coming in at something like 40%, but the Vale is up there amongst the best performing local authorities in the whole of the UK. We're on at least 60%. And as Colin has already outlined, we're aiming to hit that 70% target. So just to say again, thank you to you and your team, Colin, but also really important, I think, for committee to extend its thanks to residents across the Vale who've adapted to the changes and worked so well with us to ensure that they're a success. So on behalf of the committee, sincere thanks to all those who are working with us around this really important area. And Colin, if you'd like to move on to the second part of your presentation, which I know is talking about next steps in the legislative framework. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So I'll start with the legislative update. So first one is extend the producer responsibility scheme for packaging waste, known as EPR. So this is based on a polluter pays principle. So we hope that we as an authority later on in 2024 will be able to sign up, and then it's expected to be delivered in 25-26. So what this means for kind of plastic packaging, the people who manufacture and produce this waste will be responsible for the end use. So we sign up to this later this year, and we register ourselves as an authority. And what that basically means is we will get paid for the collection of that material, and we will be reimbursed those costs by the producers. It has been delayed for a couple of years, to be honest, but we were hopefully that it'll be expected to roll out in 25-26. So we haven't quite seen the sign up and the details as yet, and the modelling hasn't worked yet because it'll be based on compositional analysis or the amount of tonnage you collect. We are hoping to be involved in trials at the end of this year, so perhaps in 12 months we'll have a little bit more understanding how that will work. The next one is the deposit return scheme. So this is proposed through reverse vending for drinks, bottles and cans, and it's likely that this will be based at retail premises, probably large supermarkets. And again, this one has been slightly delayed, but we hope this will be rolled out in 2025-26. So Welsh Government estimate that there's 14 billion bottles and 9 billion drink cans in circulation annually. So if we think that as a resource, it's quite frightening how much of that gets either left in street litter, in litter bins, and doesn't actually get recycled at all. And when you think that we collect our harder plastics for an income of around £180, £160 a tonne, and aluminium sells in excess of £1,000 a tonne. So you can see the amount of resources being wasted there. And then you've got the Environmental Protection Single-Use Plastics Bill that came out last year. So the phase one came out in late October 2023. And that deals with things like hard plastics and balloon kind of sticks and cups and cutlery, polystyrene, etc. So you might have noticed if you do take out food now and again, the polystyrene has disappeared and that's been replaced with an alternative. So that was phase one, and phase two is in spring 2026. And that will largely look at things like microplastics or biodegradable or not so biodegradable plastic bags. Carrier bags will be phased out in its entirety. So that's phase two. And then we've got the Recycling and Work Regulations Wales. So that the Recycling Work Regulations actually made up of three different instruments. That is the Waste Separation Requirements Wales Regulations. There's the prohibition of incineration or deposit of landfill of specified waste, and a prohibition of disposal of food waste to sewers. So the top one, the waste separation requirements, is the separation of commercial waste. And that will be, there's a duty from the 6th of April for commercial premises to separate their waste like we do as households, and largely that captures everybody. So whether you're in health, whether you're in retail, or whether you've got a little shop, or whether you're a restaurant, everybody will have a duty to separate their recycling. So we're working on that. We've got a team set up for this. We are trying to capture new business. We've largely contacted all of our existing customers, and I think there's in excess of 600, and we are transitioning them into the new regulations and an opportunity to expand our commercial business. So we have structured a 3-tier system for starting with a small quad bag up to a suite of bags like we have at domestic properties, up to bespoke large bulk bins, and we hope to be able to capture a large amount of commercial business across the Vale of Glamorgan. The next one is the prohibition of incineration and deposit in landfill. So that basically means that there's a ban on recycling products go into those. It's difficult with black bags because if we know there's contents of recycling in them, there are exemptions for householders. So some of it does escape, but that ban is in place, putting more duty on everybody to recycle more. And the prohibition of disposal of food waste to sewers is that it's mainly aimed at capturing those who are in apartment blocks, who had the little macerators in the kitchens, liquidising the food waste and depositing it into sewers. And there's a ban on that. So that makes up the new regulations. And the one we are most concerned about is the UK emissions trading scheme. So this is proposed costs for emission of fossil-derived CO2 from combustible waste. So the largest ones are products made from essentially crude oil, so like plastics, etc. So this energy from waste was never originally included in this emissions trading scheme, but they look like the UK government are now going to include energy from waste. And this is not likely to come in for about 4 or 5 years, at least 2028. But from April, we'll make sure this is added to the our risk register. So effectively what this means is there could be a carbon tax added to energy recovery. So our Viridor plant, if we look at the tonnage we're producing in there and how these regulations are likely to work, it could be a cost pressure of £500,000 a year. So even more reason to drive everything out of that black bag and reduce the fossil-derived fuel from the black bag. So that is something we are really concerned about. There's not enough information available on it at the moment, but our contract management team who manage the project with partnership on behalf of the 5 councils who use the Viridor plant are working with DEFRA, and we as a waste authority have just signed up to join a regional waste benchmarking group aimed at looking at the emissions trading scheme for the future. So that will be subject to further reports likely in the future, and saying we'll keep the committee probably updated once a year with various waste as we progress and our strategy. So that is one we need to be really concerned about for the future. Okay, the next slide is the infrastructure update. So we've got our resource recovery facility, and I know the committee has been, or most of the committee have been over to see the plant, and any members are welcome anytime. If you just contact me directly, I can either take you around into Vizzy or as a group, and the invitation is always open. And we've been operating about a year now, and as I mentioned here earlier, now we are source separating most of our recycling. We are near to producing an income of 1.4 million this financial year from both sites, mainly from the Barry site, the new site, as opposed to a gate fee cost pressure of about 1.5 million pound. Yes, we operate more staff, we operate more resources, and we run these plants, but that's how the model stacks up and is much more sustainable, ensuring that this material has the high value and gets recycled here in Wales, or if not the UK. We got the Barry Reuse Shop opened, say in December. It was a soft approach, and we've got an official opening penciled in for March. And they say it's managed, a facility managed by Emphas Foundation. There's a little bit more detail in the report, and they're a registered charity that work with our contractors, FCC Environment, who are contractors who manage the 2 household waste recycling centres. We've also got the Atlantic Trade and Estate fleet parking proposal. So we've actually purchased land that was available. There's a map attached to the report, but we will now require a further business case and submit a capital bid to be able to construct and build that. And we'll have to build a business case around savings, revenue savings, I guess. Also, the Landau Household Waste Recycling Centre, we plan to extend the current lease, improve the access, and there will be a further report. There is a further report pending and likely to be referred from Cabinet to this committee in the next around about 2 months, I would guess. But that's going to be in circulation and referred to Cabinet quite quickly in the next couple of weeks. Okay, so there's some key targets just to note, really. So by 2025, we've got a 26% reduction in waste we need to achieve, zero waste to landfill, 50% reduction in avoidable food waste, 70% recycling target, as we've discussed today. So by 2030, 33% reduction in waste, 60% reduction in avoidable food waste. And then by 2050, One Planet resource use, 62% reduction in waste, zero waste production, and net zero carbon. And then I have to press this one twice, Gareth, to get the full detail up. And once more. That's it. And this is our aims as a country. Apologies if I've included a slide in previous presentations, but it's always a good referral to understand where we are as an authority at the moment. So this is a Welsh Government slide aimed at looking at the overall waste strategy. So reading down the left-hand column, by 2025 towards zero waste, which is Welsh Government's strategy document. So we need to reduce waste by 27%, which we've achieved already. We need to achieve the recycling rate of 70%, and all being well, we'll get back above 70% next financial year. Anaerobic digestion is a priority for food waste, and obviously we've now got our anaerobic plant up and running now, and we are treating all food waste in that through that process. We need closed loop recycling systems, high quality separate collections. Well, since April last year, we've now rolled that out to all of the Vale of Glamorgan, with a little bit left of work to do on the flats and apartments. But hopefully the new workplace recycling regulations will only add to this. And then residual waste to high efficiency energy from waste, which we've got our Viridor plant up and running, and as close to zero landfill as possible. So we're for the targets for 2025, we are looking and really sitting quite well at the moment. And we are, as an authority, on target to achieve all of those. And then on the right hand side, by 2050, that's about achieving zero waste. So the Welsh Government have an ambition to have zero waste. I'm not quite sure how that will be achieved and how we will treat things like dog fouling or other waste that will be quite difficult to avoid, but that's the ambition. So looking in the centre, in 2010, we were using the resources of 3 planets. That's what that's supposed to represent. And in 2025, if we bring in all the measures down the left-hand side of the column, or every authority in Wales, we will then be using the resources of 2 planets. And then with waste prevention, 100% recycling, and as much or near to zero waste as possible. Only by that time, we are likely to be using resources of 1 planet. Okay, so for the items 3 and 4, really to take any further questions.
Yeah, thank you, Colin. Really clear, helpful presentation. Clearly some challenges ahead, but as you've said, it sounds based on performance to date as if the Vale is well placed to step into what will undoubtedly be additional but important challenges in the coming years. Any questions or comments from councillors, please? Councillor Hooper.
Thanks for the presentation again, Colin. Thank you, Chair. I got one question and just one comment, well, a wider comment. When we're talking about reducing our consumption, and you think about how do we do it, I think that we've got, this shows the value of devolution and a devolved settlement, because I think we've got a difference from our Welsh government than we've got from Anthony's English government, which I liked his reference earlier. I think that's a positive thing. But one of the things that isn't referenced in there is that we need to have a situation where we're consuming less. I think that's the underpinning thing. We can't just keep recycling and expect us to have the same lives, live the same lives as we do now. And I think that's one of the things that needs to change. I do have a question, Colin. It relates to the fleet parking. And I'd just like to know a little bit more about why we've purchased a piece of land without a full business case, and would you be able to give us a few more details on that, please?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Huber. So you're right, we do need to consume less. If you look at the waste hierarchy, what we should be doing is challenging what we buy and the amount of packaging we buy, and buy more smartly, I guess, with food, waste, etc. But unfortunately, we are a bit of a wasteful and throwaway nation now. So, yeah, behaviour will be a difficult one to change. On the fleet parking, I think it's probably fair to say that it's largely postponed at the moment. So it was already in the capital programme. It's only because of the challenges next year that has been taken out of the programme. So we purchased the land originally with enough money in the capital programme to actually construct it. So it's just through the challenges at the moment. So we just have to resubmit that bid.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Colin. Do any other councillors want to come in on this aspect of the report? No, I don't see any hands. So again, thank you, Colin. I think we've had a really good discussion about the report. In terms of recommendations, I don't think I've picked up any recommendations from committee members, just that I would say that we would support the changes as a committee that the council is proposing, recognising the challenges, and particularly important to ensure that in things like the move to 3-week collections at flats and apartments and the proposed removal of some bins in the public place, that appropriate steps are taken to ensure that there is good communication with those affected by that. And you've outlined that already this evening, Colin, so I think committee can be reassured about that. So thank you very much. You're free to leave us. You're welcome to stay, Colin, for the rest of the committee meeting if you'd like to, but equally your evening awaits, and I'm sure you've had a long day, so please feel free to leave us at this point. Thank you. And we move on now to agenda item 5, which is Audit Wales recommendations regarding governance and the planning service. So this is a reference to this committee from the planning committee. And just to remind committee, Audit Wales undertook a review of the governance arrangements for planning in July to August last year. And while the findings were generally positive, they identified some gaps in governance arrangements which needed to be addressed. So the report is before us tonight, committee, so that we can consider the audit findings and the proposed response to the recommendations, with any comments or recommendations going back from this committee to governance and audit. And for this item, we're joined by Ian Robinson, who's the Head of Sustainable Development. So Ian, can I welcome you, and please can you take us through the main issues in this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I've not got a presentation in the same way that Colin did. This doesn't really translate to PowerPoint and to diagrams as well as Colin's issues did. So I'll just run through the main points and then invite questions from there, if that's okay. So thanks, Chair. You set out the background there as to when the audit review occurred, and we had the response late last year. It made four or five key recommendations for governance in the planning service. One was to agree a new and updated terms of reference for Council's Planning Committee, which clearly states its purpose, role and responsibilities. Also to contain a kind of commitment to regularly review and update when necessary the terms of reference. Secondly, to develop a plain language planning protocol and to include it in the Constitution. So it's easily accessible for all stakeholders in the planning process. To undertake a review of the scheme of delegation to ensure that the planning committee is focused on the most strategically important planning applications. And then point 4, which is related to point 3, to ensure that all applications submitted by all officers in the planning service or related services are considered by planning committee and not delegated powers, to safeguard against perceptions of conflicts of interest and to promote transparency. And then as a kind of separate recommendation that the service plan should clearly present performance measures and targets in its plan. just maybe just a little bit more meat on the bone to those 4 recommendations. So in terms of the terms of reference, probably a relatively brief document setting out role of planning committee, its function, its composition. I would suggest possibly also, the process for replacing members on planning committee, and details of the range of a suite of functions that planning committee consider. The plain language protocol, really something to give all stakeholders in the planning process kind of faith in kind of the consistency and transparency of the process, if you like, so that everyone gets a fair and equal service, notwithstanding the kind of principle underpins planning about each case on its merits, but that really should be where we're looking at the acceptability of something, but whereas actually process and how people are treated, that should always be consistent and fair. So the recommendation there, suggests a protocol should include things like elected member involvement in the pre-app process, personal and prejudicial interests, predetermination, bias, lobbying of members, site visits, officer member relations, call-ins, conduct at meetings, referral of delegated applications to committee, things like that. Now, that's probably the recommendation where there's probably the most content, I guess, to be added to our process and added to our procedures. I'd be really interested to hear from members as to what members would see as being value or concerns with that kind of document and how they interact with the planning process. From my own perspective, I'm actually quite keen on this idea, and I think that it would assist officers in kind of how we deal with different stakeholders, how we deal with different kinds of requests, in order to ensure consistency of approach. And I'd be interested to hear if members felt similarly. In terms of the scheme of delegation, I mentioned this to the planning committee when they considered it recently, but I think one of Audit's views was that our scheme of delegation could be inverted, and by that I mean, whereas at the moment it lists the things that officers can deal with under delegated powers, so there being the implication that anything excluded from the list goes to planning committee. I think they're quite keen that the list is explicitly a list of what goes to planning committee. And Audit Wales made the point that those matters going to planning committee should be the ones that are of strategic importance. And then I mentioned obviously the point about officer applications going, which I don't think is too controversial in my view. When this was considered by planning committee a few weeks ago, the main points of interest seemed to be, I think, probably the third of those points about the scheme of delegation and the scope and type of applications coming to planning committee. My take from committee was that members were concerned to ensure that there wasn't undue restriction placed on what should be considered at planning committee, and maybe a concern that Audit's recommendations were suggesting a slimming down of agendas. So that's obviously a point in the reference before you tonight. And then finally, I would just note that in the report, members will note that the proposed continuation of the political reporting of this document. So after this evening, it's due to go to Governance and Audit Committee, and then a separate report to be provided to Cabinet with a proposed draft of those items, taking into account the feedback received from members at Planning Committee and at tonight's committee and the subsequent one. It's our aim to then provide a draft to Cabinet, hopefully for endorsement before reporting to full council, for members to hopefully agree a protocol, a terms of reference, and a scheme of delegation that members kind of all see as being beneficial, positive to the process, and to the good of the governance of planning in the Vale. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. Just one point of clarification from me, if I may, and also a question. So you made reference to when this item came before Planning Committee, there were some concerns from elected members about proposed changes to the scheme of delegations, but clearly the call-in procedure will still be in place, and therefore members will be able to call in within reason. When I say within reason, I mean within whatever arrangements are put in place, there will still be a call-in procedure that members will be able to use in relation to planning. And then, so if you just confirm that, that would be helpful. But then my question is also, sorry, forgive me. You respond to that, and I'll come back in with my second question. Thank you.
Okay, sorry, Chair. Yes, happy to confirm that the call-in procedure would certainly remain, and there was no question in Audit Wales' eyes that the call-in procedure remains a valuable and a key part of the process. I think the key pointer from them was.
Oh, I think we may have just lost you. Ian, you're coming back.
Yeah,
good.
I was booted out. Sorry. I think just the key point was that Audit Wales would encourage members in exercising their call-in duty to be mindful of what the purpose of planning committee is, and to be mindful of considering, is it a matter which warrants committee attention? And I guess a large part of that reason is because they're very mindful of efficiency in the planning service and value for money, and that's delivering value for money to the public, particularly in the current context of the financial challenges that we're all facing. So Audit Wales we're keen to ensure that members are mindful of that, and not just calling in applications which are unpopular locally. Now, I wouldn't propose personally that a protocol is explicit as to what members should take into account, or what members should be weighing up when making that. I think it's general advice around the issue of strategic importance. It's for any member individually to weigh up in their mind whether they think it is of that importance, and exercise their calling accordingly. But yes, in summary, yes, that would remain.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. And then, if I may, because I'm not seeing any hands from committee members, so one question from me as well, if I may, Ian. So I can see our organisational response to Audit Wales sets out timescales for the required changes, and you've made reference to some views that have come, both from within the officer team and also from discussions with elected members about what the content of some of the amended governance arrangements might be. So my question is, who's involved in the drafting of those changes? And, for example, particularly in terms of the plain language planning protocol, who will determine that that's actually fit for purpose? Because we've all been in meetings where, we're using language and acronyms, which, if you're doing this stuff day in, day out, appears to be clear, but might not necessarily be clear, particularly to members of the public. So who's going to be involved in that?
That's fine, thank you. So it's my intention that I'm going to lead on the drafting of that. I mean, to be completely honest, there's not a kind of a structure or group in place for kind of in terms of members now for comment on that. So I think that was the purpose of planning committee and this evening's committee and governance and audit, to feed into that process, and make it as explicitly clear as members may wish, what the kind of content they think would be appropriate, and I guess it's probably my job to make sure that I'm translating that into a plain language protocol. I'm happy for any member of the council, not just these committees, to contact me with any suggestions, any feedback outside of these processes as well, and then obviously a separate report to cabinet then, and if there are changes required, any feedback from cabinet as well, that can be fed into what's put before full council, and then it can subsequently be amended. So there's lots of stages where members can feed into that. If you think it would be a benefit, I'm happy to send some further email correspondence to all members. Again, inviting as another opportunity to feed into that process outside of these committees. I would like there to be as much kind of consensus building as possible towards it, and it not be simply simply, my view, officers' view, the views of members on one committee or another. I'd like there to be as much consensus as possible.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure committee members and all elected members would welcome any opportunity to engage with something which obviously we're all dealing with to one extent or another. So thank you for that invitation, Ian. Councillor Hooper, did you want to come in on this?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ian. And I just want to start off. I think it's really important when, as it seems from this, you get officers engaging with their audits. I think that's really positive, and I think you've used the words like welcomed their audit recommendations, which isn't something that happens very often in audit. So I think that should be welcomed. I, for one, would support these recommendations. I think it is appropriate that we manage concern from residents in a way that sets a bar that actually encourages members and residents to think about it before they come in with an objection or a call in. I think this is something that's appropriate. Our planning system in Wales, as in the rest of the UK, is best described as broken. And I think this report indicates that this council is not broken when it comes to a planning authority. And I think picking up areas to improve would be a good thing. So thank you for your report.
Thank you, Councillor Hooper. Councillor Iannucci.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if sort of what scope would be considered, sort of thinking with an equalities hat on, because what is, I suspect, plain language to Ian probably would not be plain language to me or any other groups necessarily. I know we've got sort of consultative forums and that kind of thing, but just sort of a plea really that full consideration is given when we talk about developing a plain language document, that is sort of widely fed back on. And if there are any current plans on how widely you might be consulting on that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Ian, are you able to respond to that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor. There's, I hear what members are saying about kind of their, maybe their interpretation of plain language, what mine might be. I mean, I've spent the last 20 years, probably the bulk of my conversations on planning being with members of the public and people who aren't involved in the planning process every day. So I personally feel I have a good handle on what is needed in terms of a plain language approach. It's an interesting point actually about consulting wider because as I said, there's a series of committees which we've proposed to bring this to. But there's not anything in the programme outside of that in terms of like I said, the issues of equalities and maybe groups that don't interact with the planning process as frequently as we would like and as frequently as they should. And that's a really important thing to consider. And that's the thing I'll give a lot of further thought to, and as to whether there are other bodies, other groups, other sections outside of member groups which actually could input to this in a way which would benefit the final product. I think it's a really good point. Thanks. Sorry, I was going to say the only thing I'm mindful of there is in the organisational response form there's a sort of a timeline which already is split because there wasn't a planning committee earlier in the year. It's something I'll give thought to, and it's something I may well contact the colleagues at Audit Wales about, because if there is further engagement and consultation on it that's warranted, it might mean that timeline in the organisational response form changes. But I don't personally see that as a problem. I think Audit will be satisfied that as long as they can see that we're actioning the recommendations in the best way possible, if it takes slightly longer, that shouldn't be a problem in principle.
That's great, thank you. And broadly, the proposals seem fine. I think making everything as clear as possible to everyone who wants to access it is broadly a good move. But yeah, just checking because I suspect you know more than the rest of us. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Ian. So I'm not seeing hands from any other councillors, so I'm assuming nobody else wants to come in on this. But just to capture some of that brief discussion, and in terms of recommendations going back to Governance and Audit Committee, or at least feedback from this committee going back to Governance and Audit Committee, what I've noted is that we would recommend that Governance and Audit consider whether further engagement and consultation around the detail of the proposed changes is required, and particularly perhaps consider whether or not, I think there's an equalities group, an equalities forum, whether or not there might be benefits in engaging with the equalities forum to ensure that the plain language scheme is actually fit for purpose in terms of everybody that we would want to engage with. So thank you, committee. I don't have any other agenda items, so that concludes our business for this evening. So just remains for me to thank you for your attendance and remind everybody that our next meeting is Tuesday the 12th of March at 6 o'clock. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you then.